This is Gemar Nedarim Daf Pei Zayin as we conclude this month of Teves. As well, almost concluding Maseches Nedarim, quite exciting. All the learning is generously sponsored by a close friend of the Daf, as a Schos Ilin Neshama for Aryeh ben Yaakov V'siyata Dishmaya. The learning the entire Chabura should bring Aryeh ben Yaakov Tanai in placing Gan Eden Shalmaila closer to the Kisei HaKavod, continuously being Nenem Iziv HaShechina, and ultimately being a Melech Yashar for his entire family, and of course, the entire Chabura. So we're holding on, Pei Vav Amid Beis, and we ended off yesterday with a Mishnah, just to go back for a moment, to remember what is the din in the Mishnah. The basic gist of the Mishnah was that if someone thinks there is Neder A, and he mefers it based on that which he thinks, but it's really Neder B. He thinks his wife made a neder, but it's his daughter. He thinks his daughter made a neder, but it's his wife. He thinks the neder was for Naziris, but it's really from a carbon. He thinks it's from a carbon, but it's really from Naziris. He thinks it's from figs, but it's really from grapes. From grapes, it's really from figs. Said the Mishnah, what is the halacha? Harei ze yachzor v'yifar. He has to go back and be made for the neder once again. So says the Gemara, based on that din, the basic premise, that you have to be made for a neder, seemingly with precision, that you have to know exactly what the neder is and who made the neder. Says the Gemara in the bottom of Pei Vav Amid Beis L'meimra. The Mishnah seemingly teaches us, Dinei Oisai Dafka, Diyaniya Oisai, that's quoting a pasuk, that when the Mishnah says, Yaniya Oisai, when one is trying to figure out what the neder is, Yaniya Oisa, is precise. You have to know who is the Isa. If you think the Isa is your wife, but it's your daughter, you think it's your daughter, but it's your wife, it does not work. Yaniya Isa means he restrains her. So says the Gemara, seemingly we see in the Mishnah that you have to know with precision who is the one that made the neder, and only then can you be made for the neder. So we turn over to Pei Zayin Amud Aleph, today's daf, and the Gemara now articulates what is the problem with that premise. Says the Gemara, V'agabe kroyim, when it comes to tearing kriya, Tersev, says the Torah, on the top line of Pei Zayin Amud Aleph, al, that when it comes to tearing kriya, it says al. What's the al? Explains the Gemara. It says, Tersev, Al Shaul Val Yonasan bin Noi, that he tore kriya. I don't know why the highlighting is not working. Apologies. I don't know why the highlight is not working. We can apologize, but we could hope that it starts working again. Says the Gemara that when it comes to tearing kriya, it says Al Shaul Val Yonasan bin Noi, that it says that they're tearing kriya for Shaul and for Yonasan. Vitanya over on the second line, and it says in the Brisa, Amru Lai, they said to him, Mis Aviv. The Brisa explains that if someone hears Rachmana litzlan that his father is nifter, Vikara, and he tears kriya, and afterwards he finds out Nimsa binahi. He finds out that in reality it wasn't his father that was nifter. Whom was it? It was his son Rachmana litzlan. What is the halacha? Says the Brisa, Yatsa Yedei kriya. He is yaitse, his obligation of kriya. So ask the Gemara on the fourth line of Pei Zayin Amud Aleph. Seemingly we have a similar wordage. It says al, and yet we see that it has not to be precision. That what if he tears for thinking it's the father, but it's really the son, but it's really the father? What is the halacha? Says the Gemara, the halacha is your yes, yoitze, your obligation of kriya. So asks the Gemara, why is our Mishnah any different? So answers the Gemara, Amri, they said, Loi kasha. There is no question. Ha bistam, ha bimifarish. So the Gemara explains that there's a fundamental differentiation, that we can make between the case of the kriya and our case. In the case of the kriya, explains the Gemara, the case is referring to that you tore kriya stam, not specifically for the father, and then he found out it was the son, or vice versa. But rather, he tore a kriya knowing there was a death. That's when, if he finds out afterwards it was someone else, that it works. V'ha-tanya, this is not a kasha, this is a raya, as Rashi would generally point out, the bini chusa, that this is bringing a raya 5 lines down, Peizayin Amid Aleph. V'ha-tanya, as we learned in a brayso, Amru loy meis aviv, if they told him your father was nifter, v'karani tiras kriya v'achach nimsa b'nai, and afterwards he finds out that his son says the brayso, lo yatsa yidei kriya. It does not work. You are not fulfilling your obligation of kriya. But continues the brayso, and here's the line that is our proof. Amru loy meis. They tell him someone, a relative of yours, was nifter. They did not specify that it was particularly the father. Ukasavar, and he thinks avivu. They didn't tell him that, but for whatever which reason, he thinks it was the father. Vikara and he tears kriya. And then they find out afterwards that it wasn't the father. Rather, whom was it? It was his son. Then yatsa yidei kriya. Then your yotzei, your obligation of kriya. So we see clearly in this brayso, if he thinks it's A and it's B, you do not fulfill your obligation, which is exactly the din in our Mishnah that we learn out from Yonia Oisa, that if you think it was the wife that made the neder, but it was not, it was the daughter, you're not yotzei the hafara. Similarly, we see over here that if it says al shalv al yonasan binoi, that if you think it was A and it was B, you're not yotzei. In which case are you yotzei? Only if you tore stam without any prior knowledge. Answer number 1 to our stira. Continues the Gemara, answer number 2, Rav Ashi Amar. Again, as everyone sees, the highlighting is lagging a little bit. I don't know why. I apologize. We're 10 lines down. The first line is Ashi. Says the Gemara of Ashi Amar, Kan betoich kidei dibur, kan la'achar kidei dibur. Says Rav Ashi, I'll tell you a different differentiation between the case of kriya and our case. One is when you found out the mistake within the amount of time of toich kidei dibur. What is the amount of time of Teich Kidei Dibur? The amount of time for one to say, Shalom Aleichem Rabbi, a second or two. That's when, if you found that it was the wrong person, and you found out right away, then you're yotzei. But if you found out Achar Kidei Dibur, you found out a minute or two later, then you're not yotzei. And now we explain, when we said that you're yotzei your obligation of tearing kriya, shenimsa binoi b'toich kidei dibur. That's when you thought it was the father. You found that it was the son. But when? A second later, b'toich kidei dibur, they tell him, Rachman al-Litzlan, your father was nifter. He goes and he starts tearing kriya, and then a moment later they say, no, it was your son. So since it's within such a short amount of time, then he fulfills his obligation. But the other cases where they said to him, other case that says lo yatidei kriya is when la'achar kidei dibur. That's when he finds out after a few seconds. Tanya. Once again, here it's not a kasha, it's a raya. Someone sick in his house. V'nis alef. And what happens? That person faints. And they think Rahman al-Litzani was nifter. Vikara. And what happens? He tears kriya. And then afterwards that person died. He wasn't dead at the time that he actually tore kriya. Lo yatsa yidei kriya. He's not yotzei's obligation of tearing kriya. But Amar Rav Shimon ben Pazi, Amar Rav Yeshua ben Levi, 3 lines before the Y lines, Misham bar Kabara, Lo Yishanu, El Shemeis, Le'achar Kidei Dibur. When do we say it doesn't work? When do we say that he's not yotzei, his obligation of kriya is only if he found out, only if the death occurred after the amount of time of Teich Kidei Dibur. Aval b'toich kedei dibur on the last narrow line. If they found out within a short amount of time, a few seconds later, what is the halacha? Says the Gemara in the last line, kedibur dami. Anything that's found out within a few seconds has the status of being the same exact entity. And that is the second way of differentiating that. When do we say, if you thought it was A and you found out it was B, you thought the wife made the neder and it was the daughter, or vice versa, etc. That only doesn't work if what? It's la'achar kedei dibur. But if it's within the toich kedei dibur, it's within a second of two, then it would, yes, work. Says the Gemara, the Hilchasa, what is the halacha? A very famous halacha, a very known halacha, a very important halacha. Says the Gemara, what is the halacha? The Hilchasa, toich kedei dibur is kedibur dami. That within the amount of time, it's considered dibur chutz, except for a few critical cases that toich kedei dibur does not work. This is a very yisaidistic, a very famous Gemara. In which cases would toich kedei dibur not work? Says the Gemara the following list: Mimigadef, one who Rahman al curses Hashem, va'ovid avodas kachavim, or one who worships an idol. Umekadesh, one who gets married. Umegarish, one who gets divorced. Says the Gemara, these four cases we do not hold of toich kedei dibur. What does that mean? What that means is as follows. What that means is if someone goes and says to a woman, and a second later says, oh no, I don't want to get married. Boom, they're married. Someone gives a get, says, and a moment later he says, I don't want to do it. Too late, they're divorced. If someone bows down to an idol or says, this idol is my God, and then a second later says, no, too late. If someone is mevarich, someone curses Hashem Rahman al-Islan, and a moment later he says, I didn't mean to do it, it is too late. In all of these entities, there is no halacha of toich kedei dibur. Why not? So the basic explanation says the Ran, why do we normally say that toich kedei dibur is kedibur dami? Says the Ran, you know why? Because normally if within a second or two you retract, the normal mindset of a person is it gives you a second to compute what you're doing, and if that second you pull back, it's not considered that you had the full-fledged knowledge when you did it. However, these four entities are so strict that no one leaves any wiggle room. Someone Rahman al-Islan bows down to an idol or curses Hashem. Someone does a Kedushin or a Gerushin. These are entities that are held in the highest severity. So in such a scenario, no one leaves his das, his mind open even for a second, and therefore he cannot retract. And we continue on the bottom of Beis Zayin Amud Aleph, says the Mishnah, Amra koinim teinim v'anavim elu. Someone makes a neder from these grapes and figs, she'ani toyemes, that I am not going to taste. I will not taste these grapes or these figs. Kayim l'teinim, kuloi kiyim. If the neder is confirmed by the father, by the husband, with respect to either the figs or the grapes, kuloi kiyim, the entire neder to both entities is considered mikuyam, is considered a confirmed neder. But hafer l'teinim einoi mufar. If one revokes the neder for the te'enim, it's not considered revoked until he revokes even for the anavim. Different explanations what this line means, but the simplest way of explaining is when it comes to hafara, it's all or none. So since he only was made for a part of it, it doesn't do anything until he's made for the other part. The Mishnah continues part 2. Amram koinim teinim shani toyemes va'anava shani toyemes. A very similar case. But this time he adds in the word shani toyemes on each entity, on both the grapes and on the figs. He adds in that I will not taste them. Hare elu shnei nedarim. Says the Mishnah, you added in those extra words. You pointed out that each one is a separate entity, and therefore each one, both for akama and for afara, both for certification and for revocation, they both have a separate neder, and each one is danned, each one is judged separately. And we continue, says the Gemara. Mani Masnisan, who is the opinion of our Mishnah? Rabbi Yishmael. Our Mishnah only accords with Rabbi Yishmael, and we'll see this is not a conclusive opinion. Titania, as we learned in our Brisa, says the Torah, Isha Yikimena, Isha Yifirena, and her neder he will revoke, or her husband will confirm or revoke. Amra. So if she says, the case of the Mishnah, Kayim L'Teinim, Kulam Kayim. Says the Tanakama of this Brisa that we learn out from the pasuk that if you did a kama for a part, the entire neder is mukam, the entire neder is certified. We turn over to Beis Zayin Amud Beis. Continues the Brisa, which should sound very familiar with the exact same din like our Mishnah. Hafer L'Teinim. But what happens if he's mefer, he revokes the neder with regard to Teinim? Einoi mufar. It is not considered revoked. Achifer af la'anavim. Divrei Rabbi Yishmael. So Rabbi Yishmael is clearly saying the exact same din as our Mishnah, that hafara, it has to be done all together. However, when it comes to hakama, if you certify part, the whole neder has a din of certified. So the Mishnah is like Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Akiva Oimer argues Rabbi Akiva, and he says, Harehu Oimer Isha Yikimenu v'Isha Yifirenu. Says Rabbi Akiva from the hekish, from the smichos, from the fact that the Torah put Hakama and Afara right next door to each other, learns out Rabbi Akiva, Ma Yikimenu Mimenu, Af Yifirenu Mimenu. Says Rabbi Akiva, he argues in Rabbi Yishmael, you cannot split the din of Hakama for Afara, and rather, just like when it comes to Hakama, when you do part of it, it affects the whole thing, so too by Afara. Let's just explain for one moment. Everyone so far is agreeing that when it comes to Hakama, part works for all. Why? Why is that? So the reason is, the Ran and Amud Aleph explains that the word Yikimenu could be read as Yikayim Mimenu, Yakim Mimenu, that he confirms part, and from there we learn that the whole thing is confirmed. That's Rabbi Yishmael. So Rabbi Akiva agrees, and Rabbi Akiva just says, but the fact that the Torah wrote Yifirenu next door to Yikimenu teaches me whatever we say by Hakama, that if you're making part, it works for the whole thing. We say the same thing by Hafara. That is Rabbi Akiva arguing Rabbi Yishmael. So I asked the Gemara in the classical Gemara case of ping pong, Rabbi Yishmael, Mikesev Yafar Mimenu. According to Rabbi Yishmael, says the Gemara, how would Rabbi Yishmael explain Rabbi Akiva? Rabbi Akiva seemingly has a beautiful idea. The Torah put Hakam and Afara together, they have the same din. Says Rabbi Yishmael, no. Yikimenu, we could darshan Yakim Mimenu. But when it comes to Yifirenu, we cannot darshan that. It does not say Yafar Mimenu. And Rabbi Yishmael learns that the smichos put in the two psukim enough are not enough to teach us this drasha. Rabbi Akiva makish afara la'akama. Why does Rabbi Akiva disagree? Explains the Gemara, the hekish of the two of them together. Mahakama mimenu, afafara mimenu. So two different explanations. Our Mishnahs like Rabbi Yishmael, and Rabbi Akiva disagrees. Continues the Gemara with a third opinion, about 8 lines down, Beis Zayin Amud Beis, Amar Rav Chia bar Abba, Amar Rav Yochanan, Zu Divrei Rabbi Yishmael. That this din in the Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael v'Rabbi Akiva. That's the Brisa. Aval Chachamim Oimrim. Says Rav Chia bar Abba, you got two. But there's a third opinion. The Chachamim disagree and they say, Makish Hakama le'afara. We make a hekish. Ma hafara, ma shemifer hafer, af hakama, ma shekayim kayim. Says the Chachamim the exact opposite. Says the Chachamim, just like when it comes to hafara, we said in the Mishnah, if you were made for half, it doesn't work. You have to be made for the whole thing. So the way that the Chachamim learned that is, you have to be made for the whole thing to be made for. But the part that you did, that part is made for by itself. So says the Chachamim, Hakama is the same thing, that it can be done in half. So we have two opposing opinions. Let's just speak out the three opinions. We have Rabbi Yishmael, the din in our Mishnah, that Hakama, the way that it works, if you're making part, the whole thing is making. Hafara? No. Hafara doesn't work that way. Rabbi Akiva says no, Hakama and Hafara are exactly the same. You're making part, the whole thing is certified. You're made for part, the whole thing is revoked. Says the Chachamim the opposite. Yes, Hafara and Hakama are the same, but the opposite of Rabbi Akiva. Not if you do part, it's all. But rather, says the Chachamim, see the Chachamim, that if you do part Hafara, it works for part. You do part Hakama, it works for part. We conclude that says the Gemara, Amar Kainim Te'inim, the end of the Mishnah, Amar Rava explains Maas Nisan is Rabbi Shimoni. The Mishnah that said if you said a separate Shani Tayemes, then it is a separate neder. Says Rava, that is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Why? Rabbi Shimon is the opinion that the only time it has a din of a separate neder is if you said a separate shavua, a separate neder, Shani Tayemes, for each and every one. However, there are those that disagree with Rav Shimon, as Rava is pointing out, and they would hold the fact that you said Tainim and Anavim, that is enough to split into two Nedarim, but our Mishnah is according to the opinion of Rav Shimon. We'll stop over here. We'll pick it up from the Mishnah in the next shiur.